Easily one of the biggest upsets of the Winter 22 anime season early on was probably Orient. I heard a lot of buzz around it. A lot of people are excited for another work from the creator of Magi coming out. And yes, the sad thing that came from the series is that it's a slow burn. It's a very slow progressing shonen, one of those series that you feel like it just goes on. And with so many shows trying to vie for people's attentions, it just wasn't working out. Now, that's not to say the show continued to be that way. It did end up building into some things. It's just the question is it enough to really go back and check it out? Well, that's what I'm going to get into with my review of Orient. This is for the first core. They have already announced a second core coming out in summer of 2022, so let's jump into it. Orient opens up in Hinamoto, and Hinamoto in its recent history had been overtaken by Oni. Oni had appeared out of nowhere and started taking over the lands and essentially splitting the people in two. There was a people who wanted to fight back against the Oni, raising up arms and becoming known as the Bushi. And then you have those that decided that the Oni were kind of like gods and they should be revered and taken care of and that they should actually serve the Oni. We'll jump forward to our present day. We follow a guy named Musashi, and Musashi is one of these miners. And he lives in one of these cities that is essentially accepting the Oni, and so they mine on a regular basis, mining up ores to feed to the Oni. Well, at the same time, Musashi was raised by a Bushi that actually had honor and wanted to fight against the Oni. Well, Musashi's been kind of claiming that he's being a miner until eventually one day he could join up with his friend Kojiro, and the two of them can create a Bushi band who will go out and fight the Oni. And while finally raising their arms against the Oni, quickly finding out they don't have the equipment to face the Oni, following the scrolls that were left behind by their master, they decide to venture out in the world, get stronger, and eventually face off against these Oni that basically threaten the land. They learn about the weapons that they use to fight against the Bushi. It's basically swords that are basically infused with this crystal that they obtain from killing the Oni themselves. And more about the history of the world itself, and again, that divide between the people that accept the Oni and those that want to fight against them. So my thoughts on Orient. Honestly, the very beginning of the show was not a selling point. This show does have a very slow burn to it early on. Now, the thing that was grabbing my attention early on was this idea of essentially the Bushi, who once fought against the Oni to save the humans from the Oni, became the enemy. There was like this propaganda that was being spewed upon the teachings that were being given upon the students about how the Bushi were evil. They would have Bushi essentially have to be chained to their sword and ridiculed on the streets. So it was kind of an interesting thing to see this propaganda filling the land to where you had the people who were once the saviors becoming the enemies. They see them as this threat that caused this battle to rage on between the Oni and the humans, and they feel it was unnecessary. It was just bloodshed that was unnecessary, and it was all the fault of the Bushi. But even still, it wasn't really enough to keep me completely captivated early on. It wasn't really until we had that final moment where Musashi finally decides he wants to stand up against the Oni, and they go up against their first Kenshin, which is like these very powerful versions of the Oni. And then you really get that idea of, wow, this is something that Musashi himself isn't just going to be able to topple over. There is a sense of the underdog thing, which is typical in your shonen epics. These long-running series where, yeah, the main character isn't super overpowered early on, and they have to work their way up. And they're kind of relying on the people around them, these other Bushi bands, to actually do the work for them. But honestly, it wasn't until probably we got to Tsugumi, who was like the first other Bushi they end up running into, when we get into her story and the Bushi band that she's involved in, where I started to see this writer's ability to really put together some interesting stories. Through Tsugumi's story, we really get a sense of not all Bushi bands are good, and this idea that some Bushi bands are kind of headed by people that are always driven by self-interest. That not all Bushi bands are made out to be the good guys. They're not all great people that strive for the survivability of humankind. Some of them are more for selfish deeds. And the manipulation that Tsugumi is going through and the struggles that she has was an interesting story to really kind of go, okay, this writer has something in here. I've never actually personally experienced Magi, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. So this is where I was starting to get that, okay, this writer is good. This writer does have something fascinating they can do with these characters. It doesn't really let up here because we go right into the swords, the weapons that the Bushi use, the kind of the trial they have to go through in order to wield them. It's something that I kind of akin to something like Seraph of the End, where it's not just a simple you pick up the sword and you can use it. There's sort of a trial that you go through, an acceptance that you have to have with the sword that you take. And really, kind of from this point, a lot into who Musashi is, and let's face it, what's going to make Musashi the special main character that nobody can beat. What makes our main character so special? Because we have to have that special thing in there. And yes, it does get into that whole aspect. And I think it was an interesting quirk. I'll just say that. Having a main character with a unique thing that makes them so special, that kind of wasn't a good thing, in a sense. It feels like it's not really a good thing so far, but we'll have to wait and see as it kind of progresses into the future. Musashi is honestly like your super hot-blooded main character, the one that just wants to charge out in a battle, take things down. He has his own little self-justice that he wants to exact upon the world. He just seeks that he wants to take down the Oni. The Oni are the threat, and he must take them down. Kojiro, on the other side, is more kind of driven by honor. His father was this guy that was once a bushi. He's gone through a lot of terrible things. Kojiro himself was also punished for the sake that his father was a bushi, so he also had to carry a sword and drag around a weight because he was deemed as one of these terrible bushi, a bloodline of these terrible people that put them through this war. But he's also kind of the smarter of the group, whereas Musashi is kind of the hot-headed, doesn't really get things really easily. Kojiro is kind of the person that kind of has to explain things to the viewer that, yeah, Musashi's not getting that quite right. And then when you have Tsugumi who's added into the picture, it really kind of adds a little bit of a twist to the whole thing. Obviously, there's a little bit of a sexual tension aspect that's given early on with this whole thing, because Tsugumi doesn't really know how to interact with people properly. There's this whole doofy thing early on when they first group up together where she feels like she has to give her body up in order for them to be friends. She doesn't really understand how to become friends with people. So there's a little bit of that added in there as well, but she's almost kind of the bubbly nature to add to the group, to kind of bring them out of more serious tension moments, while also at the same time being almost like a guide, because she knows the outside world a lot better than Musashi and Kojiro. So like I said, it's a good chemistry to add to the group, and I think that'll be something that will be really great going forward with the series. Shoot, there's even a moment where we see Musashi is kind of a selfish person. His driving force of taking things down is almost to a competitive nature that he's very selfish. They even have some point where everybody's going to take down a Kenshin, and he decides to literally cave in the floor below them just to stop them from stopping the Kenshin, just so that he can get the hit in. It's like, really? Are we going this far with this character? So while I can agree with everybody that this show does not sell itself very well early on, it is a very slow burn series, I will admit that later on, especially when we get into Tsugumi and going forward, it was a lot better. I think Tsugumi especially, adds a lot of chemistry to Musashi and Kojiro's story than they had early on. Early on, it was just really kind of the hot-blooded guy and the not-so-hot-blooded guy charging into battle. And I think Tsugumi really kind of added a little flavor to their grouping that I don't think was there early on. Rounding their chemistry together really does make them a solid bushi band going forward. But with all that said, I don't know, it is a very hard sell for me to suggest people this series. I think it's a series, if you're looking for a long-running shonen epic, you might want to check it out, but at the same time, I think it's such a slow burn, it's really hard to sell. I think if you get as far as Tsugumi's story, I think you'll start to see that storytelling pick up, and I think that's the part which you'll see if the story is going to be something that you're going to be interested in. At the same time, yes, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. This show does not look good. It's really sad how the low quality of animation ACGT do with this series. And I think this is kind of one of those expectations that I think have been built with other series. You have My Hero Academia, you have Jujutsu Kaisen, you have Demon Slayer. There's so many high quality, high production value shonen epics out there these days that having another shonen epic that's not really of that high quality out there right now really is a hard sell. I think the slow climb to power stories about a main character who's an underdog that slowly gets more stronger and fights against the big bad is a lot more easier to sell these days, just because we've been kind of brainwashed that all these series have to have high production values. I made a whole video discussing about the death of the old shonen epics, when so many of the shonen epics these days are sold based on beauty and visuals and animation, that something like this comes out of the woodworks and it doesn't have that production quality with it. It's kind of a harder sell with the other ones. It's not to say that those stories are better than this story or this story is better than those stories. It's just something to really consider when you're thinking about a series that is probably going to want a long investment from you. With that said, I will say the visual style of the series is excellent. It's something that was kind of driving me to watch Magi originally, is I love the creator's art style. I love the character designs they create, and that was something equally here. I love the character designs here. Musashi looks great. Kojiro looks great. I love Tsugumi's outfit. Even some other side characters, like some of the other Bushi bands, a lot of the characters are very unique looking. A lot of the styling and just character, the scarring and stuff like that, the characters get from their battles, you can kind of see them on the character, and it looks really unique, and I love the style that they give the characters themselves. But yeah, with all that said, that's my thoughts on Orient. I hope this tells you something. I think I'm really in a mixed bag. I love the style of it. I love some of the story elements they're doing, but it's a hard sell for me just because it's such a slow burn series that's not really doing too much unique. That makes it very difficult for me to sell on it. I definitely, like I said before, I will be checking out the second core of the series, and I'm hoping something will really pick up at that point. Something that'll really sell me that this is something that people really should check out. But as it stands now, it's kind of up in the air. If you're really interested in what I've kind of presented to you, definitely check it out. But other than that, we'll see how things go. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the series, or if you're going to be checking it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video if you can. Support us on Patreon. I'll throw a tips link in the description below. Definitely appreciate everybody that does. And y'all take care.